I have written on, not written on, up on a wall is just a quote. And, you know, we've been talking about Catholic social teaching, hard to believe. This is our last session tonight. We've been doing this since the month of September. So we have had a lot of sessions. Our sessions here in church have always centered on the same topic, some aspect of Catholic social teaching, and a big part of that has been the encyclicals of the church. I think the key phrase is what's on a wall, and you can look forward. Catholic social teaching. Our session on this topic ends tonight, but the need for this topic will last forever. So Catholic social teaching, which actually starts with the person who lived Catholic social etiquette and life with Jesus. And then as we travel from Jesus forward, Catholic social teaching really takes an explosive impact back when we get into the 1800s. As we talked about many times before, we had a couple of videos on what occurred in the 1800s that propelled the need for Catholic social teaching. What we're going to do this evening is our session tonight will be a tad different than most of our sessions. Tonight's session will end about close to 7:30. Typically we go to close to 8 o'clock. But at around 7:30, a little bit before 7:30, our students, our little ones will return. They're going to be doing some skits for the rest of the evening. So from 7:30 to 8 o'clock, we'll see what skits or what they're going to present on Catholic social teaching. What I thought would be fun, and just to see whether or not you can do this or not, we're going to have just a little test or maybe a quiz. Okay, let's say quiz because it doesn't sound as threatening as a test. Now, it's 10 questions, and we'll travel question by question. Eventually, it'll be placed up on a wall. I'll ask the question. The question is actually going to be on a wall. I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer the question, and then we'll double back after we get through the 10. And just for your own benefit to see how well you have, or how well your understanding is on Catholic social teaching. Here's the key. Everything we've talked about since we gathered here in September, and a lot of things we repeated time and time again. So those items, those subjects then became the topic of my questions. So these questions aren't esoteric, they're not something we've never talked about before. It's just asking stuff that we've said many times. What happens if you don't do well? Okay, well, you can't move on to the next grade. Okay, but what will happen? Everyone passes. It's just, and you don't have to raise your hand if see who got 10 out of 10 and who got 1 out of 10. It's nothing like that. It's just for your own little fun and benefit. And obviously, to ask the questions, give the answers, and then review the questions with the answers. It's all a learning experience anyway, and that's what we'll be doing tonight. So everyone has a little test. Do you have one, George? What are you looking for? The answers? No, sit back over there. Huh? There's one in every class. You got some guy trying to slip up here. Yes. Yeah, you're thrown out of the Catholic Church. Huh? Now, what happens? I'm going to give if you do bad, I'm going to give your results to our incoming bishop. Because someone asked, well, if I give the results to the bishop who's retiring, then, so I figure, well, I'll give it to the new guy. How's that sound? He's only 54. He'll be around longer than the rest of us, probably. Well, at least me. Okay, good, George. Did you see anything while you were up here? Okay. Okay, let's just get started. Hopefully you have your little test sheet. Hopefully you have something to write with. This is just for your own benefit. So it's not to embarrass anyone. Just to see how well you retain some of the stuff we talked about as we travel through the year. So question number 1. Name the first Catholic social encyclical written by a pope. Name the first Catholic social encyclical written by a pope. Now, this is one that we mention this, I would think, every month. Name the first Catholic social encyclical written by a pope. Question number 2. All Catholic social teaching is based on the life of one person. Name that person. All Catholic social teaching is based on the life of one person. Name that person. Question number 3. What great revolution in Europe and the United States that started in the late 1700s and existed throughout the 1800s forced the church to address the social ills of the time? So it's on the wall. What great revolution in Europe and the United States that started in the late 1700s, existed throughout the 1800s, forced the church to address the social ills of the time? Question 4. Name the Pope who wrote the first Catholic social encyclical. Name the Pope who wrote the first Catholic social encyclical. Now, this fellow we mentioned time and time and time again. Five. In what year was the first Catholic social encyclical written? In what year was it written? The first Catholic social encyclical. Question 6. Because Jesus died so young, Catholic social encyclical has never been and will never be rooted in the gospel of Jesus. Because Jesus died so young, Catholic social teaching has never been and will never be rooted in the gospels of Jesus. True or false? Number 7, Matthew in his Gospel, chapter 5, verse 1 to 12, offers a great powerful social teaching. What is the name of this teaching? Matthew in his Gospel, chapter 5, verses 1 to 12, offers a great powerful social teaching. What is the name of this teaching? Eight, true or false? The rights and working condition of workers has never been a part of Catholic social teaching. True or false? The rights and working condition of workers has never been a part of Catholic social teaching. True or false? Nine. Exactly 100 years after the first social encyclical was written, what pope wrote an updated version of the first called Centesimus Annus? Named this pope. So what pope wrote a Catholic social encyclical 100 years after the first Catholic social encyclical? Number 10, a more modern day pope has often said, a little bit of mercy makes the world less cold and more just. Can you name the Pope who owns this quote? So a more modern day Pope has often said, a little bit of mercy makes the world less cold and more just. What Pope owns that quote? Now, before we go over these, especially on a true or false, I remember a lot of years ago, but for many years, I was teaching down at Westmoreland County Community College, and I would teach introduction to philosophy and the subject of logic. And the first year teaching down there, it was the spring semester, so it ended right around mid-May. And I had to give the final exam to everyone. So I thought to myself, well, I don't be grading these final exams. There are 45 students in a class. And I thought, if I give them essays, that means that they take the essay exam, and now I have to read all this stuff. It's going to cut into my time. So I thought it's got to be an easier way to do this. I got to give these guys a final exam. How can I make it easy on myself? So what I decided to do was this. I gave them 100 points, 100 questions, true or false. So 100 true or false questions. Then I decided to do something that would be a little twist, and I would be able to grade their papers really, really fast. All I have to do is look at it. So I gave them 100 true or false questions, and every question would be false. All 100 questions would be false. So I thought, great, they'll turn it in. I could get these things even done and turned into the office even before I leave for the day. Because I was actually a priest at the time. It was just something I was doing on the side. So I thought, okay, good, all I have to do is just look, and I'll just look to see all F's, and then I'll know the guy did it right. And every time I see a T, so I should be able to fly through these. What was absolutely amazing is no one got a perfect score. No one got a perfect score. There were a few people who got like 98s. 98 questions right. And when I looked at their paper, they actually had, I remember one person in particular who got a 98. He actually had false written down for every answer, but he scratched out 2 falses and switched to a true. Because he said to himself, there's no way every question is false. No way. And so I remember the following year, the fall semester, I figured I would do the exact same thing, but I would do a little reverse psychology. Because, one thing about life in a town such as Lower Burrell or New Kensington, word travels, word gets out, people talk. So I thought, okay, last year's students probably told this year's students, hey, look, the final exam, it's going to be 100 questions, they're all false. So I simply reversed the ask of the question to make every question true. And a whole pile of people got it wrong because they turned in their test with all F's. So I had them. Okay, let's just double back. This is only for your own joy, so you don't have to raise your hand when we get done. Just again, everything mentioned here except the last question. The last question was mentioned only once. Every other question or every other answer, we've talked about these many, many times during the course of the year. So, the first question. Name the first Catholic social encyclical written by a pope. Anyone know the answer? Rerum Novarum. Okay, the name of that is Rerum Novarum. First Catholic social encyclical written by a pope, and it simply means of new things. Rerum Novarum. Question 2. All Catholic social teaching is based on the life of one person. Name that person. Jesus. Matter of fact, I said that even before we got started. I gave you the answer to that one, Jesus. And clearly, in the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is the person who shows us the path. Everything we do in life is we're trying to emulate and follow Jesus. So Jesus sets up Catholic social teaching. And Jesus, in the Gospels, he always shows compassion. Jesus always forgives those who are difficult to forgive. Jesus offers love to those who appear not to be warrant any love. Jesus just has that incredible gift of giving to those who need and giving to those who appear not to deserve his need. And I think that's a great challenge in Catholic social teaching, to be kind and just to those who appear not to deserve kindness and justice. 3. What great revolution in Europe and the United States that started in the late 1700s, existed throughout the 1800s, forced the church to address the social ills of the time? What was the name of that revolution? Industrial Revolution. You're exactly right. Remember, we had the video, we talked about the strikes, especially down at the Homestead strike in 1893. So that was the Industrial Revolution. Number 4, name the Pope who wrote the first Catholic social encyclical. That guy's name? Leo, what number? 13. Now, just a little side note, because I always think this is fun. Pope Leo XIII wrote the first Catholic social encyclical in 1891. Now, let me ask you this. This is just a side note, just to see if you could get this. How many popes were named Leo before Pope Leo XIII? How many folks really know their church history? If you know your church history, raise your hand. Okay, let me ask you this. How many popes, now Pope Leo XIII wrote the first Catholic social encyclical. How many popes were named Leo before Pope Leo XIII? Anyone know the answer to that question? 12, you're exactly right, 12. You know how they figure that out? You know how the numbering of the Pope works? Whenever a Pope selects his name, they go back in the history of the church and see how many popes prior to that used that name. And then if it was 22, say Pope John the 23rd, which was the Pope that was instrumental in starting Vatican Council II, okay, of the early 1960s, late 50s. When he was named Pope John the 23rd, what you automatically know is this: there were 22 popes in Catholic Church history that were named John before him. When he took the name John, he was the 23rd guy using the name John. So Pope Francis, he's the first Pope ever to be called Francis, so he's Pope Francis. There's no reason at this point to give him the number, but he doesn't use it. But if the next Pope, whenever that happens, if he also takes the name Francis, he'll be Pope Francis II, because this current guy is Pope Francis I. So Pope Benedict the 16th, that just retired, before Pope Francis. What you now know is this: there were 15 guys in church history that were Pope Benedict or used the name Benedict before him. Since Peter, I think it's 238. An interesting side note, and what always makes people a little nervous, but I think this is a fun little side fact. Our first Pope was Pope Peter. And Jesus said, Peter, upon this rock, and the word Peter means rock, I'm going to build my church. So Peter becomes the first Pope. And you always hear these little stories about, when the end of the world's going to occur, it's going to happen this date, it's going to happen that date. So there's a lot of people that believe the end of the world will occur so no one's ever been called Peter. No Pope has ever taken the name Peter since Pope Peter I. So since Jesus named Peter the first Pope, no other Pope, there have been 238, have used the name Peter. Like I said, there's been 23 guys using the name John, 16 guys using the name Benedict, 11 guys using the name Leo. No one else has ever used the name Peter. So there's those folks who believe that a sign of the end of the world will be when a Pope takes the name Peter. So that's kind of the Alpha and the Omega. The Alpha and the Omega is the beginning and the end. So if the next guy, whenever that happens, is named Peter, buy as much stuff as you can, because you probably won't have to pay for it. If the world comes to an end, buy Vets and Porsches, because the world does come to an end, then you have the joy of enjoying it and the world ends. So that's would be my advice. The next guy called Peter, just go out and buy all kind of stuff. Where did I leave off at? 5, okay. In what year was the first Catholic social encyclical written? I told you, 1891. 1891. 6. Because Jesus died so young, Catholic social teaching has never been, it will never be rooted in the Gospels of Jesus, true or false. False. Great, guys. Number 7. Matthew in his gospel, chapter 5, verses 1 to 12, offers a great powerful social teaching. What is the name of this teaching? We went over this item by item a couple months ago. What is the name of that teaching, everyone? The Beatitudes. The Beatitudes. As we said, the Beatitudes is a word that when you translate it, it means to have a good disposition, a good outlook. Bea means good, and attitude is an outlook, a disposition. Number 8, another true or false. The rights and working condition of workers has never been a part of Catholic social teaching. True or false? False. So I'm staying consistent. There were only 2 true or false questions, and they're both false. So you might have said to yourself, there's no way he's making both false. Maybe you scratch out the answer and one were true. So I'm sticking with what I know works. Yeah, the next time I ask this, everything's going to be true. So tell that to future generations. Number 9. Exactly 100 years after the first social encyclic was written, what pope wrote an updated version of the first called Centimus Annus? Name that pope. Who was it? That would have been then. And 100 years after 1891 would be 1991. What pope wrote this encyclical dedicated to the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum? John Paul II. And as a little side note, how many popes were named John Paul before John Paul II? 1. And I'll give you a little side note. You know, you hear all kind of nice little things. And I remember Pope John Paul I. I learned 2 lessons with Pope John Paul I. He became the Pope of the Catholic Church on September the 2nd, 1978. And he died unexpectedly on September the 30th, 1978. And I'll never forget, back when I was in the seminary, it was my first year in the seminary. I'd already gone to college, and I went to St. Vincent's, at that point then, to become a priest. And the rumor that circulated in the seminary for literally months and years after the death of Pope John Paul I, everyone said that the next morning, he died in bed, so he died in his sleep. But everyone claimed that had he lived, and in the morning sitting on his desk, was an edict that would allow priests to marry. And all he had to do was get up and sign it. And we were like, oh man, hours, just hours away. Hours away, I can't believe it. One more day, that's all we need, a couple more hours. Of course, I was in seminary at the time, and I guess in the seminary, when you're younger, you know, that seemed to be kind of just, it went along with the theme of the day. That seemed to make sense. But what I will definitely remember is this. The world never stops. You think about great people in history of the world, and when they die, does the world stop? No. I was down in the, because obviously there's substantial hour difference between Italy and the United States. And after some of my buddies and I, we went out for supper on September 30th. We got back, and there was a really big test. It was a test in Christology. And back when I was in the seminary, in Christology, for a final exam in Christology, you had to have either an A or a B. If you got a C in Christology, study of Christ, the study of Christ was considered the subject in the seminary. If you got a C in Christology, either for midterm and definitely for the final, then when you were handed your paper, written on your test would be a little note that would say, see me after class. And you see the professor after class, and he would tell you, get your suitcase, pack it, and leave. Because that was considered such an important subject. So Christology, for midterm or a final, you had to have either an A or a B. So we were having a midterm on October the 1st, the day after September the 30th. And so we went out to eat, me and some of my buddies, and we got back and we decided, well, before we study, let's watch some television, because you always like to delay what's painful. So we were putting off the study for this midterm on Christology of all subjects. So we have the TV on and we're watching TV, and there's a news flash, news bulletin, and it said the Pope John Paul I just died. So we looked at each other, wow, that's unbelievable. So what? It's unbelievable. So what should we do? So there's a little place out on Route 30 in Latrobe back then. I don't know if it's still there, but it was a little place that had pool tables. It was called Alula's. And Alula's had pizza and beverages, milk. So, so we looked at each other and we figured, well, Pope John Paul the First just died. I mean, he's the Pope. This is a seminary. This is big news. I mean, this guy dies after like 28 days in office. Clearly, there's not going to be a final, a midterm tomorrow. He's the Pope. This is a seminary. Class is going to be canceled. So, hey, we don't have to study. Let's go up to Lula's and we'll just have some pizza and some beverages and hang out there for the night. So that's exactly what we did. Got back and it was fairly late, probably like, you're having shooting pole and stuff, and it gets like 1:30. So we get back to the seminary. I go to sleep. I'm really comfortable knowing that they'll cancel class because this is the Pope. Got up in the morning and one of my buddies knocks on the door, my door. He says, Kenny, get up. We got to study. I said, why is that? He said, they're not canceling class. The test is on. The test is on. We are in big trouble. Big trouble. You know, I learned from that day forward that the interesting thing about life, nothing stops. The seminary didn't even stop. All they had to do was just cancel class for that day, just one day. And that's all I needed was a day. Just in dedication to Pope John Paul I. But boy, that was a powerful lesson. And since that time forward in my life, it just never stops. So when some great person in the world passes away or is assassinated or whatever the case might be, even in American history, the great people we've had in American history who've been assassinated, assassinations that come to mind. We've had, I think, 7 presidents so far assassinated. But when I was too young to remember this, but I would hear my parents and many others talk about it. But the assassination of President Kennedy, the assassination of Robert Kennedy some years later in the 60s, the assassination of Martin Luther King. And when these great people, when these people who were just everyone was mesmerized and captivated by, when they died, when they were assassinated, guess what didn't stop? The world. That just kept going. So I always say to myself, that's true for every one of us. You know, you're important to your families. And for our parents here, where your little ones are in meeting in other parts of this building, you are the world for your little ones. But unfortunately for all of us, when we take our last breath, guess what will continue? The world. It's always a good thing to remember not to get carried away with yourself, not to think that the world revolves around me, because it doesn't. Because it will continue just fine with or without me. That's a humbling thought. And question number 10. A more modern day pope has often said, and this one I just added on because I admire this guy, a little bit of mercy makes the world less cold and more just. Can you name the pope who owns this quote? We never talked about this during the year, but who do you think wrote that or says that? Pope Francis. Just incredible. Just a great man of compassion. That was his. So you don't have to raise your hand, okay? Maybe you got 10 out of 10, 9 or 10. Even if you got 0 out of 10, that's okay. I just appreciate the fact that you were here. The person who wins is your presence. Hopefully, through the course of sitting here since September, on the Saturday nights we've been here, hopefully you learned something. And hopefully you passed on what you learned to your sons and daughters. They're the ones that you're currently cementing the future into their lives. And so I think one very important part of life, hopefully I've said this before, it's true for me, but for many years I didn't realize it. But at a certain point in your life, you look back in your life and you say to yourself, I was able to say this to myself, I was really blessed in life because I was blessed with great parents. Your kids, by the very fact that you have brought your sons and daughters here Saturday after Saturday on the months that we've had this, they are very blessed because they have great parents. What an asset. You watch TV at night, when you see someone who's young getting involved in drugs or being thrown in a police car or handcuffed, and you can tell they're only 15, 16 years old. Sometimes, and I don't know who they are, and maybe they do have great parents, I don't know. But sometimes I'll say to myself, maybe what went wrong is they weren't blessed with what I was blessed with, great parents. So I really appreciate the fact that all of our moms and dads, not only the older adults who have spent this time with us, but you guys who have sons and daughters who have come here faithfully, I thank you. And hopefully, maybe not right now, because when you have good parents and your parents are telling you, do this, don't do that, you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, they might look at you like, you know, you're really tough, mom and dad. Because Johnny's parents, he can do anything he wants to do. And deep down inside, you say to yourself, well, Johnny's not as lucky as you are, but you don't realize that right now. So if your sons and daughters realize that now, great. If when they get to be 20 or 30 and they have a child, they might come back to you if they don't realize what an asset they have. And they might say to you, Mom, Dad, thank you. I never realized what great parents I had and have until I became a parent. But I know that for them right now because you consistently came here month after month. So keep on being the great parents that you are. We're going to close with just a little 3-minute, video on Catholic social teaching. It's just a little fun thing. It kind of capsulizes Catholic social teaching. We'll watch this little video, and then after that, our little ones will be joining us for their presentations. That was just a cute little thing on Catholic social teaching. In your packets, I think it's page 3 or 4 or 5, you're going to see a page that has written on it a summary of Catholic social teachings. You see that page? On the right side of the page is a picture of Jesus sitting. This is Do you see its little picture? Okay. It's just a summary of Catholic social teaching. Hopefully, just take that home and read it. It puts Catholic social teaching in just more clear terminology and description. You'll see that in the highlighted sections, human beings are sacred, a clear reflection of God. So every one of us, as we've heard from the time we were young, we're all made in the image and likeness of God. So every one of us happens to be God. And when you treat someone good, you're treating God good. When you treat someone bad, you're treating God bad. Next one, each person is an image of God. Each person has basic rights and responsibilities very close to what we just said. Next one, our choices are made to support the greatest common good. This has always been a battle of Catholic social teaching. What needs to be done for the greatest common good? Solidarity. We are all part of one human family. Whatever our national, racial, religious, economic, or ideological differences. In an increasingly interconnected world, loving our neighbor has global dimensions. We're obligated to work for peace and justice globally. So what we notice in this one is that what someone does in another part of the world eventually will affect us. So if someone is involved in political unrest in a country like Iraq or in the Middle East and it slows down oil shipment, that eventually affects us because then oil isn't brought into our country and gas prices go up. So typically we're becoming more of a global village. As the great American historian once said, George Foster Kennan, is that we live in a global village. And what occurs in one nation will inevitably affect the life of folks in another. Preferential love for the poor and vulnerable. In every economic, political, and social decision, a weighted concern must be given to the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable. When we do this, we strengthen the entire community because the powerlessness of any member wounds the rest of society. Following the example of Christ, we seek leaders of compassion for those among us suffering from poverty or need. Examples include low income, homeless people, refugees, elderly, marginal groups, and those with special needs. You know that great quote by Pope Francis, you give someone a fish they can eat for a day. You teach someone how to fish, they eat for a lifetime. And clearly, as every pope has said for many centuries, not since just Pope Leo XIII, but it's also an integral part of much of the Bible, is that education is always liberation. And so when you educate someone who isn't, that gives them the opportunity to better their life. And when you don't educate someone who needs it, they don't have that opportunity for social mobility to move forward. They might have the opportunity of social mobility to move downward. I would ask you then to just take this home as with the rest of the packet and just go over it. Just get some salient points of Catholic social teaching. I see some of our young ones returning. Just one final thing, I'll say this. You might notice it on your packet. But on Wednesday night, June the 3rd, we're having Eucharistic adoration here and a Eucharistic procession. I would encourage all of you to return with your sons and daughters. We're going to do something like we do in a come to the table format. Our little ones will go off to the rooms to be instructed about the Eucharist and make it be more age appropriate. But what we're going to do, we'll be in church. Father Dan is going to give us a little theological explanation of the Eucharist. And then we're going to take the Blessed Sacrament and we're going to travel down the sidewalk all the way down to the bank on the far end of the Montgomery Ward's parking lot in Eucharistic procession. We'll have a cross bearer, the monstrance with the Blessed Sacrament inside. Hopefully a lot of people join us. We'll be traveling down the sidewalk. It'll probably be at 7 o'clock in the evening on June the 3rd. We'll make a U-turn around that bank and head back up, conclude with benediction. So that'll be something we'll do. I did this in Uniontown for 11 years. We traveled through the town of Uniontown itself. In 11 years, traveling about a distance of a half a mile through the town of Uniontown in 11 years with the Blessed Sacrament and the cross and the servers in the White Alps, and with about 100 people following us. In 11 years, not one heckler. Which I find amazing. No one ever wound down their window and just yelled at, well, whatever they want to yell at, but not one heckler. So I'm sure we'll be able to have that same style of success there. Okay.